We have today the second sequel of the sequence of episodes concerning the subject psychogenetic development of humankind in history. We see that humankind went through the same stages as children go through in their first 2 decades of life. Children go through 4 main stages. The sensory-motor stage, lasting to the 18th month of the life. The second stage starts from the 18th month to the 6th or to the 8th year of life. And this second stage is called the pre-operational stage. The third stage starts with about 6 or 8 years and goes through the 10th or the 12th year of life. And it has a name, the stage of concrete operations. The fourth stage starts with about 11 or 12 years and goes through the whole second decade of life, lasting till the 20th year of life, when it is fully developed. So we have these 4 main stages in human development. The first 3 cover the first decade of life, and only the fourth stage, the adolescent stage of formal operations, belongs to the second decade of life and unfolding stepwise in this second decade. That means the child is defined by the first 3 stages: the sensory-motor stage, the pre-operational stage, and the stage of concrete operations. And the fourth stage, the adolescent stage of formal operations, defines the youth, the adolescence, the second decade of life. And it is the beginning of adulthood, so that the adult human personality and the adult human psyche bases on this fourth stage of human development. That is, adolescents and adults share the same psychological stage. Modern adults living in modern industrialized societies, stay upon this fourth stage of human development, the adolescent stage of formal operations. They differ from teenagers and adolescents by knowledge and experience, but not by the psychological stage. What we see now is that the entire pre-modern humankind did not develop the adolescent stage of formal operations, apart from very few exceptions, such as the members of the Hellenistic science culture or some other educated people. But usually the common archaic adult is shaped by the pre-operational stage or by the concrete operational stage. That means that these 2 stages, the second and the third stage, define the entire pre-modern humankind, characterize the common adult living in archaic or primitive or pre-modern societies. That means that the fourth stage, the stage of formal operations, is a characteristic of the modern adult, while the stages 2 and 3, the concrete operations and the pre-operational stage, define the final stage and the mindset of pre-modern humankind. And even more, the pre-operational stage seems to be the model stage of adults living among nature peoples, nomadic peoples, hunters and gatherers, peasant societies, and the normal people living in medieval and ancient societies, such as China, India, Europe, Black Africa, or pre-Columbian America. The model stage of all these people is the pre-operational stage, and only partially these people develop the concrete operational stage, partially seen from two aspects. The first aspect means that only some percentages of people develop the concrete operational stage. That means while some percentages develop only the pre-operational stage, some others develop the concrete operational stage. The other aspect refers to the phenomenon that those people that develop the concrete operational stage do this only with reference to some aspects and not to others. So this means that the normal developmental age of an adult in a pre-modern society is the fifth, the sixth, or the seventh year of development, and only partially the eighth and ninth year of life. So we have societies with people whose developmental age does not surmount the sixth year of life, while some other more developed societies, people, persons that have somewhat higher developmental ages, with the 8th or the 9th or the 10th year of life. But the usually and common archaic person is defined by the pre-operational stage. And that is something that is supported by all data we have from ethnology. All data we have from ethnology concerning mental patterns and worldview of pre-modern society matches completely to the pre-operational stage. For example, the strong animism with the personification of artifacts, with the personification of inanimate and dead matter. This is typical for the pre-operational stage and not for the concrete operational stage. Or the full belief in magical power. In magic humans have upon nature, or magic that objects have upon humans and animals and so on. This magical belief is a manifestation of the pre-operational stage and not of the concrete operational stage. Or the belief in metamorphosis, that certain kinds can change their nature and can take the shape of another kind within a second, made by magic. This belief in metamorphosis of leopards in lions or of lions in leopards, this belief in metamorphosis is typical for children aged 3, 4, and 5 years. It belongs to the pre-operational stage and not to the concrete operational stage. Or the total lack of the understanding of chance and the weak understanding of causality, the total misinterpretation of chance and hazard, is typical for the pre-operational stage, not for the concrete operational stage. And the total lack of chance is well described by ethnology concerning every single pre-modern or archaic society. Or that these people take dreams as perceptions of real occurrences. That is typical for the pre-operational stage. This is typical for the preschool child in modern society. Or that ancient and pre-modern people believe that laws are unchangeable and eternal, made by God, and that humans are not allowed to change laws. This is typical for the pre-operational stage. This is typical for the mentality of the preschool child. And also the use of ordeals and oracles is typical for the pre-operational stage. So, what we can see is that the normal stage of pre-modern or archaic or primitive people, that the normal stage is the pre-operational stage, and that means that the usual developmental age of these people is the 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th year of life. And only some percentages attain developmental ages of children aged 6, 7, 8, or 9 years. These latter ones belong to more educated classes in ancient societies or in medieval intellectual cultures. And we see this equation of the lower stages and the psychology of pre-modern peoples as typical for the whole and entire pre-modern world, lasting from the Stone Ages over the ancient societies to the medieval societies up to the advent of modern industrial society. Only in the past several centuries, more and more people attain the concrete operational stage, and then finally the adolescent stage of formal operations. In ancient society, we have one very famous exception, that are the members of the Hellenistic science culture, lasting from 300 before the reckoning of time until the advent of the Romans in the Eastern Mediterranean, 50 before the beginning of our time reckoning. And this Hellenistic science culture, with Archimedes as his main protagonist, these people have already attained the adolescent stage of formal operations, others not. Aristotle has partially arrived the adolescent stage of formal operations, but in some other parts of his mind and worldview, he remains stuck in the lower stages, as, for example, Piaget had described by himself in some of his writings, especially in his Psychogenèse et l'histoire des sciences of 1983. And I have also shown in some articles that Plato's philosophy, especially Plato's philosophy of language and words, and also Plato's theory of ideas, is made by the lower stages. It is simply a manifestation of lower stages. So, and then we see again in modern times, in the 17th century, the second advent of the adolescent stage of formal operations. When the physical sciences emerged in the 17th century, this is a direct result of the attainment of the adolescent stage of formal operations. Sciences are made by formal operations, as Piaget himself had worked out in many of his writings. And the emergence of the physical sciences in Europe's 17th century is nothing else than a manifestation of this fourth stage of human development in the mind of the scientists. And the next great breakthrough is the Age of Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment is a manifestation of the adolescent stage of formal operations. It means the conquest of political thought, of moral thought, and of the thought about pedagogics by the adolescent stage of formal operations. The formal operations penetrate the thinking about politics, morals, and pedagogics, and economics, and that is what characterizes the Age of Enlightenment. And therefore, the whole emergence of the industrial age is nothing else than a manifestation of this fourth stage of human development. It etches out in the classical music. It exhibits in the fine arts. It demonstrates its existence in industrial economy and industrial technology, and in the whole cultural atmosphere of modern Europe. And so we see the dissemination of the adolescent stage of formal operations throughout the intellectual milieus. It originated in scientists of the 17th century, disseminated through wider social milieus in the 18th century, and spread then through whole classes in the 19th century, becoming the model stage of the whole population not before the beginning of the 20th century. In the beginning of the 20th century, we see that whole nations stay more or less on the adolescent stage of formal operations. You can see it when you regard the omnipresence of the disappearance of the belief in magic, the omnipresence of animistic schemata, the omnipresence of forms of logic such as the logismons. During the 20th century, more and more people in the most developed nations unfolded the formal operational stage. It may be that some social milieus, even in industrialized nations of Europe, in the beginning of the 20th century, developed the formal operational stage very weak or partially not at all. But we see that in the past 300 years, more and more people in the most advanced nations of the world advanced more and more, finally developing the formal operational stage. And we call this phenomenon the Flynn effect, because the Flynn effect describes the rise of intelligence in the most advanced nations of the world throughout the 20th century. According to James Flynn and others, European people, or Western people at all, in the beginning of the 20th century, had intelligence scores ranging around 70, and that is the intelligence of children aged 12. And then it is viewable and observable that the intelligence increases throughout the 20th century up to the current number of today, the current score of today, and that is an increase of about 30 points. That means the developmental ages of humans living in industrialized centuries increased from the 12th age to the 18th age. And that means humans advanced in the most developed nations of the world throughout the 20th century from generation to generation in a stepwise manner. And the Flynn effect is not only observable in the most advanced nations, it is observable around the world with changing backbenchers and frontrunners. But nowadays we see that even in the third world, in the global south, the intelligence increases over the past generations or over the past decades. And Piagetian cross-cultural psychology has tested the attainment of stages in different societies and cultures around the world during the whole 20th century. And we have thousands of tests and surveys conducted by Piagetian cross-cultural psychology covering every social class, social milieu, culture, nation, and race. And what we see is that while people living in the most industrialized societies during the 20th century usually develop the formal operational stage, at least partially, people living in developing nations perform not as perfect and perform in a weaker way. Especially traditional social milieus, archaic social milieus, underprivileged or illiterate social milieus, developmental regions in developing nations. Such social milieus usually do not develop the formal operational stage, as hundreds of surveys have shown over the past 100 years. They stay usually on the pre-operational stage or on the concrete operational stage or on both. And that is a result made by hundreds of test psychologists over the past 100 years, especially in the 50s, 60s, and 70s of the past century, at the prime of this kind of research. There are some very remarkable results. For example, in Sardinia, in the early 60s, some research was made about the concrete operational stage or about the formal operational stage. And it was shown that even the people of Sardinia did not develop the tests of the concrete operationals, such as the conservation of volume. This test here consists of changing volumes into different forms of glasses. And children, up to their 8th or 10th year of life, in modern societies, usually say, if you change the water from the lower glass into the higher and thinner glass, that then the water and the volume will increase, because the child, the pre-operational child, concentrates only on one dimension and does not consider simultaneously the filling of the glass, the beginning of the action, and the end result of the action, and therefore comes to the wrong conclusion. Whenever you understand the conservation of the volume, then you stay on the concrete operational stage. And this test was conducted in pre-modern or archaic social milieus among adults, and even in Sardinia in the early 60s, the greatest part, the greatest majority of adult people did not master this test. But Sardinia in the 60s was an European island, backward, yes, but European, and the second part of the 20th century on the other side. And when Sardinian adults in the early 60s could not master this test, then we can have here an indicator for the weakness of the concrete operations in European peoples of the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. Then you can see here that even in Germany or in France in the 19th century, there will have been some percentages of people who could also not master this test. And then we can understand better why people in traditional, underprivileged, archaic or pre-modern social milieus in the global south could not master this test even during the 1970s or even later on. And the same is true with another test, a test examining the handling of logic, the handling of syllogistic conclusions, belonging to the corner, to the border between the concrete operational stage and the formal operational stage. It is one of the first tests to identify the beginning of the formal operational stage. And children by their 10th year of life usually cannot master this kind of syllogisms. And we know from Piagetian cross-cultural psychology and from the Russian school of historical psychology, from Luria and Vygotsky, we know that archaic people cannot master this test too. And that is a clear empirical indicator of the lack of the formal operational stage in the minds of people. And Michael Cole and Sylvia Scribner and some others have conducted this kind of research in several traditional social milieus in the Third World in the 1960s and in the 1970s. And they found that about 80% of the people could not master this test and gave the same answers as here the Kashgars have given to Luria in the 1930s. The interview protocols are interchangeable. The answers are everywhere the same around the globe in traditional and pre-modern social milieus. And we have here answers of adults, not of children. That is a real, clear empirical indicator of the lack of formal operational stage in the mind of people, in the mind of pre-modern people. We can generalize these test results. What we see is that developmental windows are closed for archaic people so that they cannot gain the adolescent stage of formal operations later in their lives. And we have astonishing empirical results concerning the closing of developmental windows in the minds of pre-modern people, especially the survey of Daniel Everett among the Pirahã in Brazil gave astonishing insights into these closed developmental windows. For example, the Pirahã could not learn to draw a straight line over 8 months of daily teaching conducted by Daniel Everett and his family. They could not learn to add numbers. For example, 1 and 2 make 3. They could not learn it even after 8 months of daily teaching. They could not learn to write or to read, and actually they learned nothing at the Bush School of Daniel Everett. This is an extreme example of closed developmental window, and it shows really that these people did not develop beyond the 3rd year of life. And this is not typical, because we know from other archaic people that they are teachable at primary school level and that they can learn arithmetics or reading and writing and so on. But these people then must stay on higher anthropological ages, more close to children aged 5 or 6, so that the bridge between task and stage is easily to go, to cross, while the difference between the task and the anthropological stage in the Piraya Indians is too great to be bridgeable by them. The task has not the power to arouse higher stages to attain among these people. Usually it is, as Piagetian cross-cultural psychology has found out, that when children, very young, from archaic milieus, move to more advanced milieus, they can learn and develop according to the people to whom they have migrated. So, children, very young, coming from remote areas, coming from backward social milieus, moving to Western style societies, going there to school, they can develop according to current standards. But it is a question of time. When the migrants come too late, when they are too old already, then they will have gained difficulties. And that explains why the children of the Piraha can learn at school, while their parents could not change their structures anymore due to closed developmental windows. But in the Piraha child, when it visits school early in life, its developmental window is open so that it can learn. And this explains the phenomenon of closed developmental window when it is not used just in time. What we see is that racial biological theories do not explain the psychogenetic development of humans in history, but that the dialectic between socialization, culture on the one side, and psychological stage development on the other side can explain the effects. What we see now is that some people stay on stages of children very young. But how is this feasible? It is the most strange and the most remarkable phenomenon ever found in the human and social disciplines. But how it is explainable? Children very young are not able to tie their shoes and are not able to prepare own food. But these people are able to master their lives, to go for fishing and hunting, building houses and temples, making artifacts and making fine arts to a certain rate. How is it explainable that the psychological tests, measurements only identify pre-operational stage structures? We can understand this better when we think about animals staying on the sensory-motor stage, but being able to live their lives, knowing a lot of things humans don't know. Think about birds who can fly at very high speeds through dense forests and finding their way exactly. This is a kind of intelligence, and this is a kind of knowledge. So, matching to the sensory motor stage. And when we think that these animals are much better than children, age 3, 4, or 5, have much more knowledge, have much more skills, are able to live their lives, while children, age 3, 4, or 5, are not able to live their lives on their own, then we can understand better that pre-operational adults are able to perform a lot of things, to navigate oceans, and to erect complex societies while staying on the pre-operational stage. But we can say much more, namely that pre-modern adults are more children than normal children are. Take, for example, the belief in magic. Both children and archaic humans believe in magic. But the modern child is hampered and hindered by the adult culture in performing magical rites and magical rituals and unfolding a complex culture of magic, while the archaic human being elaborates a complex culture of magic. And that shows us that the archaic human being is more child than the child of the modern society, because it performs more magic and erects a more complex magical culture than the child does. And this has to do with the fact that the modern child is hindered by his parents and by his adult culture in performing his beliefs, and that the child runs through the magical stage only a few years only, while the archaic adult lives in a magical tradition, in a culture with long-lasting magical traditions and customs. And so, the archaic human being is more child than the child itself. And you see it also concerning all other parts of the mental and psychological life. The child is animistic as the archaic adult is. But what we know from the animism of the child? Not so much, because the child has no opportunity to live out his animistic schematas and his animistic beliefs. It is ridiculed by the parents with that aspect. But the archaic human being lives out his animistic beliefs. He adores and personifies rocks, stars, plants, mountains, waters, winds, and makes a full religion basing on his animistic beliefs. And so we see also with animism that the archaic human being performs a pre-operational stage richer and fuller than the child does. The archaic human being is more child than the child is a child. Or children and archaic human being both believe in ghosts and specters for the same reasons. But the child must hide his belief in ghosts and specters because it fears to be ridiculed by parents. But the archaic human being makes a full religion upon his belief in ghosts and specters. The child and the archaic human being both believe in oracles and ordeals. But what the parents know from the oracle belief of the child? Not much. But the archaic human being bases his judicial system on the belief in ordeals. And he relies the life of humans on the decisions of oracles and ordeals. So, what we see is that generally, archaic human beings are more children than the modern child is a child. So, what we see is that stage theory explains the entire psychogenetic development of humankind in history. Stage theory is a main theory to describe humans in history. It is a main theory of the human being at all, with a greater explanatory power than every other psychology, than every other theory of the human being. Stage theory is a core discipline to describe the mentality and psychology of the ancient Chinese, of the ancient Indian people, of the ancient Europeans, of nature peoples, of hunters and gatherers, and so on. And stage theory explains the exceptionalism of the Western culture, the uniqueness of the modern industrialized world, and the uniqueness and the special character of the modern human being, of the civilized human being, of the human being staying on the formal operational stage. Staying on the formal operational stage was an exception in world history and not the normal case. It was Piaget himself who described parallels between ancient and pre-modern humans on the one side and children on the other side. It was Piaget himself who identified the pre-operational stage as a model stage of the pre-modern human being. But he went only one of 20 steps into the right direction. It was mainly my work in 14 books and 130 articles written over the past 40 years, who has done the transfer work from child psychology to the psychology of peoples to the cross-cultural psychology. So when we compare under this aspect Piaget and Oesterdiekhoff, we find that the structural genetic theory program I have formulated over the past 40 years is the main offspring of Piagetian genetic epistemology. It is a main creation of Piagetian theory, and it is a main developer of Piagetian theory, and it is a main descendant of Piagetian theory. It is the best, the most important, and the most relevant result of Piagetian theory. That children go through stages is not very surprising. And that is what Piaget has shown. What I have shown is that the entire humankind went through the same stages, and that the pre-operational stage was even the model stage of most humans having lived in history. And that the formal operational stage is an historical exception coming into being mainly over the past several centuries in the most advanced nations of the world. And this result is surprising, strange, remarkable, and hardly believable when people must hear this for the first time. And therefore, I see my work as much more relevant as the work of Piaget himself. And I see Jean Piaget as the most outstanding, the most important, the most relevant theoretician of the entire world of social sciences and humanities in the past 300 years. And therefore, I would like to add that the structural genetic theory program is the most fundamental theory of the human being, of the psychogenetic development of the human being, of the history of culture, society, laws, legislation, politics, sciences, arts, morals, philosophy, and that the structural genetic theory program is the most fundamental theory of every human and social discipline. And it is the sole theory that has the capacity to unify all social and human disciplines under one common roof.